I'm calling that BS.
It's another version of COVID for me right now.
Now you've seen them kind of build a family, build a portfolio, essentially grow up with you as you go.
You're tuning in to The Property Couch, Australia's #1 property, finance and money podcast. Featuring the titans of the industry since 2015, we're trusted by tens of thousands of investors on their journey to financial peace. This show is powered by More.
Thanks, Opti. Yes, the #1 property podcast in the country. We've got a great show for you today. I can't wait to introduce you to our special guest. And we have Luke joining us as one of our couch crew. Luke is obviously one of our team here at Empower Wealth as one of our investment savvy mortgage brokers.
Thank you, Ben. It's
Welcome,
good to be back.
mate. Good to have you back on. And I'm getting to our special guest in a second. But before I do, a little bit of housekeeping before today's show. The More platform. So we're only a week or so away from the end of the financial year. And remember, we built the More platform for property investors. So if you have to do all of your paperwork and get everything organised, your bookkeeping, then this is the time to jump onto More, set up your asset, which is your investment property. You'll see a wealth of information on there as well. Record all your expenses against that, and we've got all the list of the 8-hour expenses. So we've done all the heavy lifting in terms of giving you the categories. You just add the expenses against your investment asset. You can also add your mortgages, and the whole thing will come to life for you. So if you are looking for a new solution to get away from your spreadsheets and start managing your property portfolio through a platform that's cloud-based, available on web or mobile, More is the solution for you. Obviously, the podcast is brought to you by More, so it really is important that you check that out. That is More, MOOR.com.au, and it's free to use, so check it out. Now, I want to introduce you to someone who I've known for many years, and he's one of the good guys. So let me just introduce you now to John Pidgeon. Now, John is the director of Envisage Property. He's the co-host of the property podcast, This is Property, and he's also a regular on Money podcast, and he's a best-selling author of Sort Your Property Out and Build Your Future. Now, as I said earlier, I've known John for many years, and he is one of the good guys in our industry. There's no hype about John. He is just very much all about facts and, most importantly, putting the client first. You won't see John standing in front of a private jet. You won't see John standing in front of Lamborghinis. You won't see John self-promoting himself through hubris. You'll see John out there with his team doing hard work, trying to get the best outcome from his clients. And mate, it's been too long. I should have got you on years ago, but welcome. And thanks for coming on.
Thanks for the introduction. Maybe I should be doing more of that. I don't know. It seems to be the way to go these days.
Well, that's
it?
what the social media feeds tend to think, isn't it? I
correct.
mean, but that's how they seduce us and they suck us in to this type of thing. But here's the big story here, right? What we want to do in today's episode is John has had over 10,000 property conversations with investors. I've had probably just about as much. And then also Luke's probably had about 10,000 conversations when it comes to mortgages and finance in this space. So that's what we want to talk about. We want to basically work into this idea that John and his team, and obviously our teams, have helped thousands of Australians navigate the property journey, not in the last 5 minutes, not in the last 5 years, but over the decades. And so that's why we always gravitate and have the best on this podcast who we trust and we know do the right thing by their customers, obviously off the back of the Dashdot disaster that exploded over the last 6 or so weeks. If you're not familiar with that, you've got a buyer's agency business who was very much in that social media space. We've seen from the creditors report that their customers are owed over $10 million. So that's money that people have paid and got no service. And also their staff were owed over $1.5 million. That's not John's business. So we're here to get John's knowledge when it comes to all things around what he's learnt over those 10,000 conversations. But before we do, like where we always like to start, mate, is tell us a little bit about your backstory. So you're growing up, where did you grow up, and did you talk about money around the dinner table?
Yeah, great question. So I grew up in country Victoria, near Horsham, little town called Minya. Grew up on a farm, and yeah, like all farmers, everything's out of your control and not a lot of it in it. So family worked hard, 7 days a week sort of stuff. No bells and whistles, no fancy holidays, no private jets, as you mentioned. But I think money was something that wasn't spoken about, and that's, we'll get to that later. But I think that formed a lot of who I am today, because they're really passionate about obviously educating people and explaining to them the rights and wrongs and the foundations of cash flow management. And that's just something that wasn't in at the dinner table. Like we and I don't actually know why that was, and I think it was probably through maybe not having enough of it, maybe don't gloat about
right, so
your
let's
assets.
unpack that a little bit. Like, how many brothers and sisters?
Yeah, so older brother and sister.
Yep.
Brother 5 years older, sister 9 years older.
Okay. And in terms of when you're living obviously rurally, was there a chance to get a part-time job? Were you able to sort of pick up any sort of, work? Obviously, you worked around the farm. Anyone who works on a farm, as soon as you can walk, you're doing some chores,
Correct.
whether it's cleaning out chook shed or whatever.
Yeah, mate, I had great role models in terms of work ethic. My dad and my brother, and mother and sister are obviously hard workers as well. But I think that male side of things on the farm was like, you just get in and help out, and the work ethic was undeniable from an early age for them, and so it was on farm work, but it was picking grapes, it was chook catching, it was like driving tractors, it was like anything and everything basically, because there wasn't the retail jobs around. But from an early age I realised that the more you put in, the more you get back out. And I just wanted to, I suppose, create a future.
Yeah. So in terms of, did you understand how much debt the farm had and all of the cash flows? Nothing.
Wasn't spoken about, but you get the feeling, don't you, in your surroundings that, hang on a minute, like other families have got this, we haven't, but I was never going to ask the question of like, why don't we have it?
Yeah, so if it's not volunteered.
Why aren't we going on holidays?
What about holidays in terms of, did you do?
Very rarely.
Because like someone need to look after the farm, right?
Correct, And I think like a lot of farmers, and I don't want to go down this agriculture path too far, but I think a lot of farmers have come through generations. Dad bought the farm was a sheep shearer, so basically just said, right, I want to buy a farm. So he was the first generation of that. Now my brother's still got it today, but when that's happening, obviously you're carrying a lot of debt, and when the unpredictability of farming kicks in, there's not too much cash flow. So not poor old us. It was great learnings because it taught us work ethic.
Absolutely.
So John, how did you get into property investing?
Yeah, so it's a good question. I went away to university and I spent a lot of time with my uncle, who was a bank manager, and he taught me a few things over a Friday night beer watching the footy. And
this sounds awesome.
And
was it just an aha moment for you?
Well, it was in a way, Ben. I think it was just logic to me. It's like. He saw two types of people come through the bank, like in the one-on-one rooms. It was the business owner, and it was someone that was building assets. Now, generally those assets were property, and in some cases agriculture, but generally they were the big hitters. And I'm thinking about that at age 18, 19, and I'm like, that actually makes sense. Everyone needs one.
Yep.
Whether they want to buy one, great Aussie dream, or live in it just to survive, they need it. Okay, so supply and demand. So that was sort of the start for me. So that was, as soon as I had enough money to get into property, that was me.
Okay, so take us on how that played out in terms of were you an active, tell us how you built up that knowledge to get the confidence to take your first action into the market.
Yeah, so I fast forward went got a phys ed degree. I was big on health and fitness, and got a job at Horsham, back in Horsham, as a phys ed teacher, and property prices there were like 60 grand. So back in 1999 was my first purchase. So I didn't need 20% for that. I only needed 10% back in the day. And my sister put her hand up and said, "I'll go in with you." So we actually put down $3,000 each.
Yep.
Right, which is quite insulting for the listeners right now because
I'm just thinking back to my first property purchase.
Yeah.
Having to the amount that we had to put in.
Yeah,
back in 2022.
That's right. The deposit is still the hardest way to get into the market.
Yep.
Yeah. So I knew very little about it other than the conversations I had with my uncle, and I started to read property magazines. That was all that was available to us. There was no internet really.
No, it
was go to the back few pages and look at yield and look at price and all those bits and pieces. I thought I like this idea of rent vesting, so I bought this property with my sister in town. Cost $62,000 I think. And continue to rent with my mates, playing footy and living life. So, fast forward a couple of years, that doubled in value through no, I suppose, measure of my ability to identify property. It was just, okay, I saw it, I could see that I could improve value. It was on a corner block and I'll be able to do some improvements to it, and the market lifted as a result as well. Mm-hmm. So we sold that property, and that was probably mistake number one.
I've got one of those. Sold the first property.
But it gave me funds to go and buy a business in the health and fitness sector, and but that's fast forward on. That's probably one of the regrets is selling property.
And so, when did you start the business? And when you decided, okay, this is because you're like me. You're an educator. You're a coach. You love to inform people on the fundamentals, which is money and then obviously property. So take us into that pathway, because obviously we want to get into what you've learned after the 10,000 conversations that you've had. But just paint a picture for our community in terms of how you started the business. Yeah,
so I after I'd acquired a few properties, I was living in Adelaide at the time, and I came across a guy he'd done a little bit more than me at that stage, and it's like, okay, surround yourself with people who have been there and done that. Spend some time being mentored by him, I suppose. I'm like, okay, there's an itch here that I want to scratch. So when we moved back to the Central Coast, which is where I live now, which is where my wife is from, I'd sold my fitness business, and I'm like, okay, I always want to put things in my control, not out of my control. And one of those is, well, if I'm going to run a business, that's in my control. If it fails, that's on me, sort of thing. So what am I passionate about? Well, health and fitness. I'm burnt out. I'm too old to play football any longer. I'm not going to make it to the
big league.
A level. So property is my education passion, and so hence I start educating.
Yeah, wow.
Now, I suppose one thing on that is I quickly realised that not everyone wants to be educated. A lot of people just want it done for them. And it probably took me a few years to find that out. It's still my most enjoyable session today, is to educate someone rather than tell them what to do. But unfortunately, not everyone wants to spend the time.
And sorry, do you find like a lot of crossover from coming from health and then moving over into sort of that property advice or that wealth advice?
Almost every part of it is relatable in terms of work ethic, in terms of foundations, in terms of consistency, in terms of mindset. Like there's massive crossover. Absolutely.
So give us a couple of examples though, because that was one of the questions I had in terms of what patterns of consistency do you see among people who successfully build wealth through property? What are some of those consistencies that you might have seen between obviously the personal side of it? Because we talk about, there's three types of sort of audiences.
Yes.
There's the DIYs, right? And then there's the done with you, and then there's the done for you.
Yes.
So, in terms of the done with you, I think that's the education space where you're helping them, like teaching people how to fish. And then there's obviously the done for you, which is a lot of the work that some people are time poor. They just want the fish caught, and then they want to put on the plate.
Yeah.
Right. In terms of that. So obviously through fitness coaching and so same sort of thing, right? But in that case, they've actually got to do the work, don't they? Right? They can't sit on the couch and get fit.
Yeah.
So what have you seen in terms of some of the consistent patterns?
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of fast tracking in that space now, can't they? They can take a pill and they can do all sorts of things. So there are some fast
take an injection. Yeah. Well, I mean that's where the money is because people are lazy.
That's right.
Inherently lazy, and so good point.
Yeah. So that's probably where I'd go to. Definitely is the work ethic and the mindset. Without a doubt, are two of the most, if not the most important things that we could have for anything really. But property investing, I've seen those that have got the mindset of, well, I know it's not going to be a smooth road. There's going to be some ups and downs, but I'm okay with that because I've got a mindset that says, well, I've got a long game here, and it's not just I'm getting in and getting out in 3 or 4 years, and I'll retire on an island somewhere. So those two for me are the real big ones.
Yeah, I think that's a big one for having a think about a lot of my clients. It is really that kind of mindset where they know that they're going to get there. It's just a question of how and when.
Yeah.
So I think that the way that people sort of have that mindset when they're approaching things, it really kind of just drives all their actions and decision making as they kind of go through that property journey.
So when you are in that sort of moment, question to both of you guys, right? I mean, I see a simple world of active passive, right? And short and long term. How much of the conversations that both of you are having are drilling down to the goal story and aligning to goals as opposed to, acquiring asset, getting rich in an active or passive strategy? What sort of, if I'm coming to you and I'm saying, I watched a couple of videos on social media. These guys have got 7 properties in 5 minutes. Yeah. How do you navigate that story? I'll start with you, John, and then I'll...
It's a really good question, Ben. I think back to my own situation. I'm like, I was running away from something, but at the same time running towards something. I was running away from the fact that we didn't have a lot of money growing up, and I'm running towards a greater opportunity for my family.
Financial security.
Yeah. Yep. So I think when we're having those conversations, we've got to look both ways. We don't want to spend too much time in the rear vision mirror, but at the same time, we've got to understand where we've come from, what's formed us, to then understand what we want in the next 10 to 15 years. And for me, I actually didn't know what I wanted in 20 years. Like when you're 19 or 20, who knows what you want? You don't. Yeah. But you want something that's better than what you've got now. Yep. And you're prepared to put the work in and have the mindset to be able to work through some obstacles along the journey, and surround yourself with good people.
Yeah.
And about you?
Oh, sorry.
No, what about you, Luke? Yep.
I feel like I'm cutting you off all the time, Ben.
No, it's all good.
No, I was going to say that, I think having that or putting that thought towards what that larger goal is. Like you mentioned, when you're 19 or 20, you don't know what that goal is, but you know roughly that you want to get somewhere. So I think, a lot of people sort of have that feeling where they want to get to that spot, but I think, spending the time and trying to actually work through with clients around, okay, well, what is that long-term thing that we are aiming for? Like, what's actually important? Once you kind of know that, then you can kind of work backwards and, okay, well, how do we get there?
That's right. Yeah. I think as you get older, that becomes a little bit clearer.
Yeah.
But yeah, you always, I think you've always got to have some sort of mobility about that and not be too rigid, because again, going back to my 18-year-old self, I'm like, okay, I want to retire by 40. That was what I saw in the magazine. That's the front page like every other week, wasn't it, or every other month? So when you get to 40, you're like, hang on a minute, I don't know if I really want this, because I'm aspiring to other things now, because I'm a bit more mature, I've now got a family, so you do need some liquidity about it, I suppose.
And I feel like as you get older, your priorities kind of shift a little bit too. I know the things that I absolutely valued when I was 20 are very, very different now that I'm seeing the bigger 4-hour approach. So.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's lived experience.
Yeah.
And how much do you lean on that, John, in terms of, obviously there's 2 parts of being a trusted advisor, there's 2 parts, right? One is your lived experience, but the other part of it is the fundamental analysis of the investment decisions that you're making, right? Because at the end of the day, when you're playing with somebody else's money, it's real. Like your money, if you want to lose your money and speculate, that's okay. But when you've got the obligation and the responsibility of looking after somebody else's finance. The story's a lot different, right? Isn't it? I mean, there's a lot of emotion and stress and all that involved, as Luke would know, in terms of time frames around the settlements now, and I've got to make sure I've got approvals. So how do you blend those two things in the 10,000 conversations that you've had?
Trust's the big one, isn't it?
Yeah, it is huge.
Trust's you've got to build trust through asking key questions and as you said, talk on lived experience, but get to understand where they're coming from. And that's the reference of going back in time before we go forward.
Yep.
And then not treating it as a transaction. Like it's a conversation. It's many conversations over understanding their situation and having them feel important to the point where they've got your trust to then create a strategy that says, right, now we're ready to go and purchase a property. Okay, that's the end result. In some ways, that's the easy bit, right? Dare I say it in 2026, but in a lot of ways it is, because up until that stage, what you're doing is you're building foundations of trust and foundations of knowledge for them to be comfortable, so that at the 11th hour, they're not going to say, oh, actually, this isn't for me. Because we've had that conversation 2 months ago.
Yeah. And that's the rewarding part, isn't it? Like when you're on this journey with clients, and you know, I've got some clients that I remember being super nervous because it was one of my first interviews or sort of meetings to have with a client ever. Yeah. And now you've seen them kind of build a family, build a portfolio, like, you know, essentially grow up with you as you go. It's like, it's really cool to be able to be a part of that with quite a few people. Yeah.
But it comes to alignment. Like at the end of the day, what my aspirations and how I think is going to be potentially different to what the customer needs. But as a trusted advisor, you know, we have a saying in our business that I'm going to high five you on the things you do well and what I see, what I like, but I'm also going to eyeball you on the things. And, you know, like you look at these LLMs and these chatbots, I mean, they're designed in their inner prompt is agree with what they said. Oh, that's a great idea. Or what a smart move. Or
that's right.
I mean, it's designed in. You know, so some people can manipulate that, and then that's what the chatbots are doing. But in reality, when you see a financial statement in front of you, and you're looking at spending patterns, and you're looking at behaviours and things like that, and you're looking at goal alignment, I'm not going to, you know, it's just, I realise that if I wanted to sell something, I'd be going, oh, there's nothing wrong here. This is all great. We just need to tweak these things.
That's right.
Well, I don't think that's an honest conversation. No. I'm going to be saying, look, what are we doing here? You know, in terms of, because we've got to get that right if we're going to hold on to property for this long. And you know, and so if someone is just going to be, you know, pardon the pun, pissing in my pocket, then I'm like, there should be alarm bells going up around that. How do you handle that, John, in terms of when there is potentially aspiration that might be exceeding potential in respect of, okay, these are the numbers we've got to work with. How are you aligning those conversations or having those conversations?
As my family would attest, I don't shy away from having those tough conversations to say, well, hang on, I'm going to call you out on that because I reckon that's rubbish. Right.
Great.
Because what that does, like I'm coming to them with everything that I've got, right? And they should be doing the same to me. And if they're not, then we're not aligned. And I think a lot of and you said at the top of the show, I think a lot of the marketing draws that type of person in anyway. We don't probably see a lot of that, but we do have some little areas that we say, hang on a minute, is this actually what you're about or not? Like, and then that actually builds more trust. They appreciate you for that.
Well, the ones who you want to have a lasting relationship with.
Yes.
You know, the ones who are going to put their head in the sand or just going to completely disagree because someone on social media said that's not true. With no qualifications or whatever. I mean, you know, half of the industry don't have any formal qualifications in the work that they're doing. When I'm talking about buyers agents, you're right. So, you know, they have the license to exchange a contract of a property, but they're not necessarily no formal training in financial services or financial planning in that type of area. So I think it's important, and that's what I love about what you do with your clients, is that it's money management first, and it's understanding how that plays into that story, which sort of leads me into the next section of what I want to talk about, is some of the bigger mistakes that you're seeing people making in terms of, you know, are there still investors or people that are coming to you that are focusing on the things that don't really matter? Like, you know, is there things in there that they're asking you questions about that you've got to say, actually, the bigger prize is over here, as opposed to that. And I know you've got one around interest rates, but yeah, let's talk to you, John, first around what that story looks like.
Yeah, I think the common mistakes I see are probably clients that don't end up going through with it. Like, they're like, okay, this is...
procrastination.
Yeah, there's a lot of procrastination going on. Yeah, something hasn't gone their way in their life for some way or another, and yeah, I'm just going to put it on hold. As soon as I hear put it on hold, that means they're out, right?
Yeah.
How many times do you say, oh, I'll put something on hold and go back to it? Very rarely. So I think that's by far the biggest mistake I see with people, is that they're not fully committing and they're not fully 100% into actually taking action. It wasn't important enough to them in the first place.
Yeah, it's a really powerful conversation, that one, isn't it? Because that's money psychology 101, in the sense that if you dig deeper into that is, am I giving myself permission to fail? Am I, do I truly believe that property values are going to keep growing over time?
Yeah.
Like, they're trying to find some excuses around what not to take action on.
Yes.
And you're doing your best to sort of show the empirical data, to show all the evidence behind it, but there's a blocker in there in terms of, and it could be that, am I giving myself permission to fail? And what is the worst thing that can happen to me if I do fail, in terms of that? And well, that's a really deep psychological sort of conversation. So I get so impassionate about trying to help those people, because I know that some of them are going to go through life and I don't want to be too cynical or critical here, but in some cases almost victimising the fact that this is my plot, and this is what I've got as my story.
Yes.
Well, you're making that story yours.
Yeah.
You can change that story if you want to, as part of that. Have you had any people who have got cold feet or focus on the wrong things?
A conversation I had with a client probably about 3 days ago.
Yeah,
So,
there we go.
Actually, it'll be Friday. But
you're having so many of them, right? So
it's particularly with everything coming off the budget and just that level of uncertainty. But I think one of the common ones from that last conversation that I had was just around the idea of, well, if I make a decision, then that takes other decisions off the table, and I don't want that decision that I make to be the wrong one, so I'm not going to make any decision. Which I think is just, I understand that thought point, but I just think that mindset just kind of, otherwise you find yourself in the next, sitting there in the next 24 months and they still haven't actioned anything yet, but the landscape's moved or,
Look, I think in the current environment that we're in, people think that there's no sense of urgency.
Yeah.
Like we're seeing it in our business in terms of, there's a lot of inquiry, but they're sort of saying, well, I don't really need to act.
Yeah.
And I challenge that because, yes, 2 weeks after the budget, the Labor Party definitely pushed the property market off the cliff, right? Like, it was already delicately poised in terms of higher inflation. So we're in an interest rate cycle that we didn't expect to be in.
No.
So sentiment and expectations were already damaged.
Yeah.
And then whack. Now we're taking aspiration out. Now properties, we basically, i.e. we want to make it easier for people to get into the market. i.e. we want to bring property prices down, even though Treasury model 2%, which is, I'm calling that BS. In terms of that. So when you're having those conversations, John, what are you trying to do? Because I know it can turn reasonably quickly.
Yeah.
Like a couple of months ago, we were talking about 2 more rate rises.
Yeah.
The economy was looking down the barrel, especially after Iran. But because Labor's had a shocking budget, people have crapped themselves, and now they're not spending. And so all of a sudden now the RBA may not have to do any more work.
No,
because
that's right.
NAB come out saying that they've gone the other way, thinking there's going to be a cut.
Correct.
I did hear that. Yeah.
So it won't take long for a few of those sort of ducks to line up again.
No, that's right.
So I suspect then you'll see sentiment start to change the other way, and then all of a sudden, like, oh, how do I pick the bottom? It's not easy to pick the bottom, is it?
Oh.
And we don't do it. Obviously, long-term businesses don't do that sort of work.
No, that's right. And I think that's the message, isn't it, Ben, is well, when is it a good time to invest? One, when I can afford it, and two, when I'm ready. Right, and that's just it. So if you're not ready and you can't afford it, then let's not go any further. So it's been interesting, as you said, on the back of the budget, the conversations that we're having with people, and there's a lot sitting on the fence, and that's understandable. There's a fair bit happening right now.
So here's this pent up demand that we're all seeing, and until everyone then works out, like this fear of not getting out, which is sort of happening in some of the regional markets right now. But then in the capital cities like Melbourne, there is this pent up demand, and then once they see it go. All of a sudden, you know what it's like, isn't it? Like, then you have wait lists, and then people are like, well, why can't I get in? Why can't I get in?
I think some of that's as well, like, not specifically the bank's fault, but I think there's a lot of indecision at the moment off the back of some of those negative gearing changes and how lenders do stuff, where they, if the bank's going to take a few weeks to let us know what they're doing to work out borrowing capacity, then that's kind of, you've still got that demand sitting there. You've just got people kind of waiting to work out, okay, well, how much can I borrow?
But you also look at, like, the first home buyer, for example, like and when I was a first home buyer, I probably wasn't, my ears weren't clean enough to sort of listen and take in what's happening in the world. But I think they've been whacked in the face a few times. Like, property prices are growing. The budget didn't deliver what it promised for them. It's gone the other way. Interest rates, the cost of living, rents are going to go up. They can't continue to save at the rate that they maybe could have. So a lot of them, it's with good reason that they're potentially putting their head in their sand and say, I'm just going to put it on ice for 12 months. But I think, the fundamentals of real estate, what's changed? Absolutely nothing. It's actually got worse. It's like, okay, rents are going to increase. Less investors are going to be in the market. The supply and demand issue hasn't changed and won't change. There's not enough properties being built. So if I'm ready and if I can afford it, I'm in. Now, the conversations of my current clients that are emailing me in the last few weeks saying, yep, I've got some equity out, I'm good to go. They're not saying in the email, what do you think of the budget? Like, what do you think? Like, their mindset is, I'm good to go because of those two factors.
I think there's such a strength that comes from knowing what your numbers are. And if you're, you know what your limits are and you've got your cash there and you know what you're comfortable with, I think that just puts you so much further ahead than
it's excellent
everybody
advice.
else that's trying to
that
speculate.
is, both of what you just said is excellent advice. But because they've executed on maybe one or two before, they know. I mean, all of the industry people that I'm talking to, they're all buying. Like, this is a great time. Because they get it. I mean, we've been through cycles before in terms of that. But I also think, coming back to your point around all of the negative in the market, there is, I mean, the property investor is also learning that buying new and off the plan is dumb. Like, it's just not a good return on investment. So even though the government is trying to coach you to go and buy these new house and land packages and off the plan apartments in these new estate greenfield, we all know that those things are the worst investments for the first 10 years. So you lose 10 years of opportunity before those property prices move. But they're a bit confused by that because their government's potentially telling them all, we're going to incentivise you to buy the dud. It's almost like they're giving financial advice that they should be sued on because it's not really good financial advice.
Well, when you look at that though, even now with land prices, because of the scarcity, you're talking 300 or 400k and then another 500 or 600 to build. Who's got 900 or $1 million to go and buy anything anyway? So
that touches
it's
a little
not
bit
going
on what
to
you
solve
mentioned the other week around
the issue.
When you're looking at purchasing an asset and you're sort of over leveraged in terms of the actual build rather than the actual land itself. So then
it's land to asset ratio every day of the week. Every day of the week in terms of what we look for and scarcity of that land. So if you think about it, there's a hierarchy of land and there's a hierarchy of residential type. Right? And so if you get that model right, then you're halfway home in terms of better asset selection in terms of that story. Hey, I want to, before we move on to from the biggest mistakes, how often do you have to realign people's view around short-term, long-term, get-rich-quick stuff versus playing the long game?
Call it my own marketing, listening to podcasts, whatever. I rarely get someone that comes along saying, I want in and out in 3 years. I just don't see it because maybe of the message. If they came off a Google ad or something like that, maybe something different, I don't know, but I just don't see it. But so if they did, you've just got to be upfront and honest and say, well, it's not speculating. It's we're here for the long game. Yep. Now, the long game for people may be very different, and I think there's a bit of a hybrid version going on at the minute where someone can't afford their own home in Sydney, for example, but they don't want their money just sitting in the bank, so they want to leverage the bank's money and go and buy an investment to then wheel around and go and buy that owner-occ at some stage. Yeah. So is that 7 years? Is that 10 years? Is that 15 years? I don't know. But I'm saying if it's less than 7, we've got to be a little bit cautious around that.
I was going to say, because we've formed a view off the back of the negative gearing changes now that they're deferred and not up front, that in some cases rent vesting or buying the investment property first before getting on the property ladder may actually not necessarily be the sage move. Yeah. The smarter move might be to get on the property ladder in your first property and then let's try and move that up in better location and then do investing afterwards.
Yeah, okay, so let's go down that rabbit hole for a bit because I agree. Like we were doing more owner-occupiers than we were in investments in a lot of ways for that very reason. Yeah. However, come back to the mindset piece around, 20-year-old Ben or 20-year-old Luke or 20-year-old John, what do they do? Yeah. Well, I can't live in Bondi. I can't buy my first home in Bondi or Toorak. So, now I have to move to Newcastle, right? Have I got that in me? Have I got the mindset and the work ethic and not necessarily work ethic, but I've got to have the ability to pivot to be able to get a better result long term. Yep. And I think that's the key for a lot of people now. And I call them investors. Even if you're buying your owner occupier, you're still an investor. You want a return, don't you? So that's the biggest shift, is the ones that are prepared to actually get out of their immediate area and go and buy somewhere where they can live, because that's the game that we're playing now. And it might be a 5-year story that they do that. Yep. And then they'll thank themselves.
Good. Well, I think the property ladder story is you're talking about. I mean, I was 4 properties in before we got to our forever home. Yeah. Right. So that just gives you an eye. I bought the house across the road from Mum and Dad. Yeah. Right in middle suburbia. Yes. And it was tired and it needed doing up. Yeah. So the question really then is, because you've got 2 options, as you say, you can relocate if you want to get, if your vision of what your home needs to be spatial and you need to have some outside area or whatever. But I also can argue that just, if you're going to try and get in somewhere, just buy the worst house in that area that you can find and do it up. Yeah. Right. And then and so turn apple into apple pie, as Bryce would say, right? Yeah. Because that is a way in which you can accelerate that story. You can equity harvest without doing any structural or any big things, and it's your principal home. Yeah. Now I understand that there's costs in terms of stamp duty, but the owner occupied home is a tax haven. Right, so the reality is all the gains you make, you get to bank into your next property. So I think that's going to be an interesting story for those people who are thinking about, they've taken away my ability. Well, they haven't taken away your ability to rent vest, but you're going to be slammed with a lot more tax in terms of what that story looks like. So I still think it's got to be on the table, but it's about planning out the strategies in terms of which one works better for me. So can I buy a doer-upper versus do I buy, I'm going to move further away and do the rent vesting? Because it is still the scarcity of the land and the appeal of the home that you want an owner-occupier to buy off you later on. Yeah. Whether that's a downsizer or whether that's someone else who's getting onto the market or a time poor professional who are trying to get on their market, you're trying to build an asset over 2 or 3 years that will allow them to say, well, that'll suit us in our stage of life. We might only have 1 child, so that'll be good for us for the next 2 or 3 years. So we'll buy that off you and then you go on your journey in terms of that. Yeah. But I think that's going to be a thing. I know in our business we're doing a lot more owner-occupier. Yeah. When we're doing more owner-occupier negotiations, expert negotiations through our buyers agents. So I really like where that conversation was going, and I think that's the conversation you want to be in. And I know you're going to get the modelling in both sides, aren't you?
Yeah, definitely. And I think just even looking at my own client base at the moment, that ratio of that owner-occupied purchasing is just, even my own personal story. Like, we bought our PPOR first, and then thinking to upgrade, it's like, okay, well, we still want to hang on to this one, but then, moving on to that next family home that way. So.
Yeah, and as I say, in real estate, there's still only 3 ways to really make money: buy at discount, add value, and capital growth, right? And the last one's out of your control, but it's the most powerful one.
Oh, yeah.
But the first 2 are very underrated, and a lot of first-time investors don't think about that.
Yep.
They actually think the other way. They think, oh, that's too old, that's too run down, I'm going to have to spend millions of dollars on improvements each year or maintenance, therefore I'll go for something that's 5 years old.
I think that's sage advice again. So let's talk about the habits of successful property investors.
Yeah, so I think we touched on the mindset thing. I think that's a given, and if that's not number 1, it's 1A. Number 2 is we've got to take action, because a lot don't take real action. I think we've got to be taking action, and sometimes, nothing's guaranteed. So we just know that if we can take some action, good or bad, we learn from it, and we can grow from there. And hopefully it's good action, but it's not always going to be good action. But if we can take some sort of action in the right direction, we can learn from it and evolve.
How much do you believe in leveraging? Obviously, we leverage debt, right? That's the secret sauce of resi property in my mind. But leveraging other people's skill and ability, I mean, that's obviously the service we sell. So how much of that comes into play when you're having conversations with these prospective clients?
So that's number 3, is leverage. Leverage your team of people, leverage the maximum of the bank's money, how much they'll lend us according to what we can handle in our life. And if you can get those 3 things right, you're a long way to getting successful, aren't you?
You are. I mean, and look, it doesn't guarantee success. There's always risks associated with that, but I really like that. So mindset, action, leverage are 2, 3 really clear takeaways. In your conversations, how much of the alignment is towards the goal setting and the planning work that you do? Because you mentioned before, I'm going to put that on hold, or how much time, and I heard you say you're having dialogues and conversations with people for a period of time as you're building rapport and trust together. So how much of that is then aligned to that goal setting idea that you do? Because you're a coach outside of this. I know you work with some high performing athletes in the AFL system as well, in terms of teaching them about that. So take me through that sort of the approach that you use for goal setting and planning to help people get to the outcome that they're going to get.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think I like to break it down into 2 parts. One is that 1 to 3 year plan. What have they got coming up that's important to them in their life? And what are maybe the top 3? And then what's the longer term, as in 10 years plus? So for your AFL guys, for example, they're 1 to 3 years. Well, I just want to get another contract and win a premiership sort of thing. But 10 years, hang on a minute, that'll make me 36. I'm probably going to be retired unless I'm Scott Pendlebury. So that means that I need to be thinking well beyond that, in terms of vocation, in terms of where I'm living, in terms of potential family, in terms a whole range of things, right? And because you mentioned it, I'm going to go there, is the AFL space. The biggest, I suppose, killer for them is short-term thinking. It's like, I'm going to buy that $3 million property now because I'm on an $800K a year contract. It'll be all okay. I'm not thinking 10 years, I'm thinking the next 3 years, and that's all. So take that outside of the AFL and into the real world, the same thing's occurring. We're thinking too short-sighted, and we're not aligning that with the longer term.
I think How much do you do, Luke, in your planning with clients around exploring the medium to longer term in terms of goals setting and planning?
I think the longer term thought process is really important, particularly for lending, right? Because anything we're doing today is going to be potentially a loan that we're going to be working towards with borrowing capacity in 3, 5, 10 years time as we build a portfolio. So I think having that longer term plan is pretty important because, the last thing we want to do is go all in on the investment property.
Yep.
When the plan is that we are going to move into the family home in 3 years. But if we've, bought the $1.3 million investment property from there and we don't have the capacity to do what we want to do, then, we find ourselves in that spot where it's like, well, do we have to sell that property that we bought, and then we're in that 3 year period and, it's just not
and the
well planned out.
The trusted advisor, businesses like John, businesses like ours, will talk people out of that. The hyper buyer's agent will say, we can make something happen in 3 years.
Yeah.
Like, look at the market. Look what we did with this client in 3 years.
Yeah.
Like, they're either naive or they're just, don't get in front of a bucket of money.
And I think it comes back a little bit to that, like that longer, or, I always like to ask my clients, it's like, okay, well, what's the most important thing that we're going for?
The big role.
To try and work out what that, that overarching plan is, whether it's now or whether it's, 5 years' time.
Yep. 5 to 10,
A good one that I got from Shane is always asking why. So when someone says, I want to do this, and you're like, why?
Yeah.
And then getting them to kind of explain it kind of almost makes it a little bit real, whether they've got to kind of put it into a, not a step-by-step process, but it kind of forces them to say, okay, well, if I want to do that, how am I doing it?
The amount of times we're sending clients back to mortgage brokers to ask more questions, it's quite not overwhelming, but it's like they come to us and say, I want to buy 2 properties in the next 5 years, for example. Okay, what's your max borrowing capacity? Oh, they told me I could lend this. Well, what's your maximum borrowing capacity? Because if you go and buy this, what's the implications for that next property in 2, 3, 4 years' time? What's your income going to be like in 5 years? Oh, I don't know. Okay, well, what industry are you in? Are you going to have any kids? Like, is your wife going to be pregnant? Like, what are all these variables?
Perfect. There's 5 perfect questions to talk about. That's what planning does. Planning allows you to sort of explore those. Then, turn the invisible into visible, and then sequence it in an effective order that doesn't require a big mistake being made. Because that's the challenge around, sort of turning a property over in 3 years. You're going to give, if there is any gain, you're going to give most of it back to the government. Right? But ultimately, to that point, it's like that's not investing. That's trading, or worse still, speculating. In terms of a market, and no one can guarantee that. Like if the war in the Middle East was to escalate seriously, well, all bets off, people. We've got major problems in the sense that we don't have enough oil to actually just run the economy. Right. So if we can't run the economy, everyone loses their job, or 5% or 10% lose their job. That's material for property value. Because if we can't get credit or we can't serve, so these are the little things where it becomes really important to sort of say, what are your plans and what's your backup plan as part of that.
And that max borrowing capacity question is such a tricky one too, because it really does, like, the answer's always like, well, it depends, right?
It does.
I think people think that it's just like a clear cut, great, this is the number, but it's like, like John mentioned, it's, are we buying this investment property to do that first? Are we, refinancing and trying to keep our debt levels low on the sharpest interest rate to give us more capacity for what's next? Like, there can be so many different ways that you can try and
I feel you can go down the rabbit hole a lot more on that. You say, okay, well, what is your income going to be in 3 years? Could it be this? Like, let's do some scenarios on, well, if I was on 200 versus 160, what's my borrowing capacity now look like? Oh, actually, I probably could go and get that 200K job. So we just sort of mapping out a few different scenarios that get the juices flowing.
Beautiful. Look, plan to become what you plan to become is our big motto here. So, and if it's got to be goals related. Like, at the end of the day, lifestyle by design, not just lifestyle design. It's like by design, meaning it's intentional, it's meaningful, it's aligned with what you're trying to do. So, some sage advice there. Hey, let's pivot, because maybe we could talk about this stuff all day, but we are running out of time. We're getting our producer Shana, they're going, can we move on to the next one? Because I've got an important one. It's where are we now, right? Like, here we are. It's 2026. We're almost at the end of the financial year and the start of a new financial year. What are the conversations you're having with now, John? Are they about affordability? Are they about where prices are going, access to credit, negative gearing, capital gain check? What are the dialogues that are going on in your world with your clients right now?
Yeah, great question. I think in these sort of times, I'm thinking of Warren Buffett's quote of when others show
when the
fear,
tide
I
goes
show
out.
courage.
Yeah.
When others show courage, I show fear. And what's everyone showing right now? They're showing a whole bunch of fear.
Yeah.
So we've got to have those courageous conversations, and I think we've got to take an amount of courage into a situation like this, because everywhere we look is doom and gloom.
Yeah.
We talk family barbecues, we talk at the local footy, we talk to the papers if we read them, we listen to the radios, anyone and everyone, unless you're surrounding yourself with really good people, are saying, I would be just sitting on my hands for the next 6 months, right? This is where the opportunities are in the next 6 months, right? I think it's those conversations that need to be had now. It's another version of COVID for me right now. We look back on it and say, well, those actually took action through COVID. And you mentioned you started broking, Luke, and just before COVID. You could have easily said, well, hang on a minute, I'm shit scared about this issue right now. I'm out of here. Now, fast forward 7 years, look at the position you're in. So I think it's, again, taking action through courage and the right team of people with the conversation.
I feel like that ties in a little bit as well. Like you mentioned, starting just before COVID hit, and particularly speaking to clients, it always feels like that there's something on the horizon that's basically going to be all over for everything. We had COVID come out of nowhere, then the RBA started increasing interest rates, so everyone was like, hang on a second, do we take on lending because loans are going to blow up? Now we've got all the, then it was the inflation piece, and then now we've got everything that's happening with the budget as well. So I think that ties in nicely to what you were saying about, if you've got your, if you're ready and you know what you've got, taking action is that key part.
Yeah, I think in the moment, it's never as bad as you think.
No.
And it's never as good as you think. Once you're able to step back and have a look at the situation, and we use the same methodology as John, in terms of the best time to buy property is when you can afford it, and your job security and all of those types of things. But if there is a time, like if you were asked to say when should you get off the fence, is when others are fearful.
Yeah.
Like this is because what's happening is you just get to buy better properties at better prices. But that's just the reality of what happens in those moments, right? In your buyer's agency business, when everyone's in that FOMO moment, you just got more customers who all want to get in at the same time because they've got a feed of the market that's confident, right? Yeah. And then ultimately, when you got fear, then they change. So just try and be calm about the story that you're being told. But it's definitely a case where if I said to, I'll ask the community, think about this in your own mind right now. Do people buy property through emotion? Owner-occupiers certainly do. Are people always looking to amenity and convenience, and will they pay a premium for that? Well, we can see that in land value, so it absolutely happens. I mean, ultimately there is a rent that's paid on land. It's a technical theory, but it's Ricardian rent theory, but there is a premium that's paid for the use of that land in the location because of the proximity to amenity, those types of things, right? So we understand that. Do we understand that there is $5.4 trillion of intergenerational wealth transfer that's coming off the baby boomers right now and over the next 2 decades, because baby boomers, males and females, are at their, unfortunately, peak or average death age. Sounds a bit morbid, but that's the truth. So 81 and 83, that's next year. So we are going to see tens of billions and technically hundreds of billions. Like 5.4 trillion is $5,400 billion of intergenerational wealth transfer. Yeah. Now, we know through the research, they're saying that potentially upwards of 60% of that money is going to find its way into property.
Yeah.
Because the Gen X's and the Gen Y's, the Gen X's are going to try and get to a better location with more convenience, more status, more livability. Yeah. And then the Gen Ys are going to take the spots of the Gen Zs. So that is an enormous... I mean, when you talk about the actual residential property market only being worth 12 trillion, like That's a meaningful amount of money.
Right.
So then you say to yourself, well, is land prices going to keep growing? Now it'll keep growing with inflation, because and also with the amount of taxes that are paid, 40 to 50% of all new property is paid in taxes. Well, taxes going to go down? I wish they did in terms of, but they're not.
No.
So land values are going to keep growing.
Yeah.
All right. Now, will they keep growing at the same rate? That's the $64,000 question. Well, the $64,000 question comes down to, I promise you, in aspiring and agglomeration economies where incomes are higher, job opportunities, the economic activity that happens in those areas, and it's a choice whether I pay $2, $4, $7, $8, $10 million for a property, because I can, I will.
Yeah.
Right? Like ultimately, I show my wealth in a couple of ways. Usually my home, my car,
Yeah.
maybe my boats and my watches and dresses or whatever it might. But the point being is, I want to live, and those people aren't going to stop living that
No.
sort of lifestyle by appeal
No.
in terms of that. So I have no doubt that the hierarchy of land and the hierarchy of property type will double down, and I have no doubt that owner-occupiers will also drive this market. And the smart investor will study that and get in behind that owner-occupier and try and buy the scarcest bit of land that they can in the best area.
Yeah.
Now, it doesn't mean you get a big block. You might only get a small bit of dirt,
Yeah.
or you're one of four that owns that small bit of dirt. But that's the way in which I see the world. And I'm going to give you the final comment on that, John, because you do the same type of methodology.
Yeah.
So what are you seeing, and what gives you confidence around future land prices and property prices?
Look, land does the heavy lifting, there's no doubt about that. As you mentioned, I think we work to an 8-point strategy, and one of those is location, and we always make sure that the location is the last one that we address, because we need to get everything else combined together to understand someone's story first, to ensure that we're not just going to location first. When everyone jumps on realestate.com, go back a step, they go to the likes of Luke, and it's like, okay, how much can I borrow? Righto, 800,000, great. I'll go straight to realestate.com tonight. It's the last place you should be looking, because you need to get all of your ducks in a row for your life first. In saying all of that, location now has never been as important as what it is in probably my time in investing in, 1999, 27 years. And the reason being is we've had Adelaide, Perth, Brisbane, Sydney's unaffordable, and then the others sort of float in behind. Melbourne, not so much, but they've all had unbelievable 5 years of real estate.
Yep.
So
now, do you want a question without notice? But do you want to quickly share that 8-point, or is it IP, or how?
So we look at overall, in no particular order other than location last, strategy, what's their overall strategy, what's their arching strategy, what's the class of property that they want to get into, which rolls into the type of property, the price of their property, but maximum price for them and what their risk profile allows, the loan-to-value ratio, where they should be, and we play around with those as well, because that can change a lot in terms of longer term strategy, coming back to goals.
That's part of the yield growth story.
Correct.
Got it.
We look at the yield, the gross yield. So looking at, what's your holding cost, how much you're saving, what's your cash flow management. Okay, I don't know. Well, let's go back a step and sort that out. Now let's get back to where we were. The buying entity, of course, which has had its changes over time, and the bit of controversy, a bit of marketing I hear, Ben, that people want to buy in these sexy sort of structures.
Which potentially is now going to cause them all amount of grief with the new law changes.
Potentially,
we warned people about it, but they just kept going, marching on.
And then, of course, location. So we combine all that together to basically say, right, we've covered all bases here. There's nothing that we haven't thought of for you to be able to move forward with some sort of confidence.
I know that we said we'd let John have the last word. I do have one last question, though. Is there something that you would tell your 20, 21-year-old self now that you didn't know at the time?
Yeah, it's a good question. I look at everyone today, and they've got so many resources at their disposal, and almost too many. You can get answers wherever you look in an instance, and I think there's never been more information out there. I go back to when I was 20 and there was no information. Like, I would have liked something in between. So what would I tell my 20-year-old self? I think it's, there's probably properties over the journey that I might have not sold and held on to a bit longer.
Cheers, mate. Cheers on that one.
Yeah, I think we can all agree on that. That's sort of...
Or the ones we didn't buy that we should have.
Yeah, that's right. And I probably, there was 7 years in the 2000s where I didn't take action. And that was because I was building a business, and I just scratched that itch. And I look back and like, why didn't I buy property through that period? Because of the performance. And again, I was just too young and didn't realise that, okay, that's what it does on a consistent level. So more consistency with the investing.
I reckon we finish on that, because I think, when I draw a conclusion of what we've just talked about, it's really clear to me around the fundamentals of wealth building and what John does with his people, what we do with our people in terms of taking them on a journey, is that it's a process. It's not an event. It's a journey around planning, goal setting, and those types of things. We talked about leverage and mindset, two key critical ingredients. If you don't have the knowledge and the experience, then leverage it from others, okay? But trusted sources, people. Not hyperbole, look what I can get to you, look at the world's changed, this is how you make money in property really fast. Avoid all of that. Avoid people who are promising you guarantees. Avoid people who want money up front. Those are the types of businesses that are dangerous. Don't pay for multiple purchases down the track that you may not get because they can close their business. So there's a couple of warnings in what we've talked about today. But I think also, the final takeaway that John just finished with as well is just taking action. When you are in a position to do something, get some advice, understand your possibilities and opportunity, and take action. And so I think that's a great way to finish. Mate, thank you so much for coming on.
Appreciate it. Thanks
we'll get you back on the Couch Crew again in the future. Check out John's materials, his books, his business, learn more about those. And of course, he'd happily take a phone call from you as well in terms of understanding your situation. And so as I close it out, say it every episode, knowledge is empowering, but only if you take action on it. So take action on it, people. Until next week, bye for now.
Hey folks, Opti here, your smart money sidekick inside more. Just one quick thing before we sign off. If you're new to the Property Couch community, welcome. One quick tip to help you get the most value from the show. Our first 20 episodes cover the foundations we build on every week. And yes, listening on 1.5 speed is totally acceptable. If you're short on time, download our free binge guide. It distills those episodes into one easy read with heaps of visual diagrams, alongside free tools inside More, your all-in-one financial home, to help you organize your money and plan your next best move. Check out all the links in our show description. And just a quick reminder before you go, anything we cover on this podcast is general in nature. It's not considered to be financial advice, and we certainly recommend that you seek out professional advice before making any financial decisions. Once again, everything mentioned is linked in the show description. Ready when you are. Catch you next week.